Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we continue with the series of lessons on Macbeth and we are going to finish with Act 4. So please have your Macbeth book and notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I'm explaining. It's a beautiful day to learn something new. So here we go. We were busy with Act 4, Scene 3. So we're going to look at the summary of this scene again. This is the only scene set in England. Macduff's trustworthiness is tested in a variety of ways by a suspicious Malcom. When Malcom is satisfied that Macduff is not Macbeth's spy, he retracts all the vices he attributed to himself. He tells Macduff that King Edward has lent them an army of 10,000 English soldiers. With the assistance of these men and Seward, he plans to overthrow Macbeth. Ross enters with further news of Scotland's woes under Macbeth's rule. He eventually reports the slaughter of Macduff's family. Macduff's only consolation is his vow to avenge their deaths by being the one to kill Macbeth. So we are continuing. We ended our previous lesson where Malcom began to accuse himself of being evil to test Macduff's loyalty and patriotism. He goes on to say that the people of Scotland will regard Macbeth as a lamb when they experience Malcolm's endless evil. Now it's very important to understand this scene. We must be aware from the start that Malcom is lying when he suggests that he possesses no virtues, no nobility, no honor, and no qualities of kingship. So Malcom here on this slide in front of you continues with his test to Macduff. Right, so Malcom agrees with Macduff. I grant him. So he agrees with Macduff that Macbeth is bloodthirsty, lustful, greedy, false, deceitful, violent, malicious, hot-tempered, and that he has indulged in every sin one can imagine. But then he says, however, according to him, there's no end to his lust. That is now Malcolm's lust. He says not all the wives, daughters, mothers, and young girls in Scotland will be able to satisfy his unrestrained sexual desire. He goes on and he says, he claims he will allow nothing to stand between him and his mad, unrestrained desire for women. He would overpower all the restraining obstacles to his lust. And the word continent that he used there at the bottom means chaste, a virtue which he claims he does not have. So he suggests that Macbeth would be a better king than him. Then Macduff answers him, where he says, boundless intemperance in nature is a tyranny. So not being able to control one's natural desires in itself is a tyranny. And he goes on, it has been the untimely emptying of the happy throne and fall of many kings. It has caused the downfall of many kings. But he says, but fear not. However, he still encourages Malcom to take the throne. He can secretly arrange the fulfillment of his desires as much as he wants, and yet appear cold. It is lacking in desire or pure or chaste. Macduff cannot imagine that his lust is so insatiable that it cannot be satisfied. So he believes that there are enough women who would be willing to please the king's sexual desires. So we can see here Macduff would prefer even the lustful Malcom as king to the tyrannical Macbeth. He believes it is a vice that can be acted out in secret and it will not be harmful to the country as such. No crime will be committed. There will be enough women who will be only too willing to please their king. Well, then Malcolm continues. So when Macduff finds a way around his insatiable lust, Malcolm continues to test him further. He is not sure yet if he could trust Macduff. So he claims that in addition to his ungoverned lust, he has an uncontrollable greed for wealth. If he were king, he would kill the noblemen for their property and possessions, because the more he has, the more he would want. So his increasing riches would act like an appetizing sauce that will cause him to want even more. And to satisfy his greed, he would invent false grounds for the quarrels against the most loyal subjects in order to destroy them for their wealth. Okay, Macduff goes on and he answers. He says this avarice, now avarice is extreme greed for wealth or material gain. So Macduff compares Malcolm's greed to a plant. He says that avarice is more deeply rooted in man's nature than lust. Desire is short-lived, for it lasts only during the summer of man's life. On the other hand, avarice has a more harmful root, for it lasts throughout man's life. It is more destructive and more harmful. Greed has caused the death and end of rule of many Scottish kings. And then we see, he says that, yet do not fear, Scotland hath poisons fill up your will. So although Macduff is deeply dismayed, he still wants Malcolm to claim the throne. Scotland has an abundance of wealth, and the royal property which will belong to him as king will be more than enough to satisfy his avarice. Now we see all these portable with other graces weighed, the last two lines. So all Malcolm's weaknesses are bearable when they are balanced against his virtues. Macduff still gives his allegiance to Malcolm despite his uncontrollable greed. And this proves that things must have been really unbearable under Macbeth's rule. It is also this reaction which leaves Malcolm uncertain as to whether or not Macduff is trustworthy. So he still does not trust Macduff. Right, and then Malcolm continues to test Macduff. He lists all the qualities of a good king, which he claims are foreign to his character. He says he possesses none of these qualities or characteristics. So this is what he's saying. He pretends to have no virtues fitting for a king, like justice or fair play, honesty, self-control, moderation, reliability, predictability, generosity, perseverance, mercy, meaning showing sensitivity and caring for others, humility, so avoiding the sin of pride, dedication, loyalty, patience, tolerance, courage, bravery, and fortitude, the calm courage in the face of danger. He claims that there is no trace of these virtues in him. Instead, he practices freely every crime imaginable in all its variations. So he's saying they pour the sweet milk of control into hell. So milk is an image of peace and harmony. He says that if he becomes king, he would destroy all peace and harmony in the world. He would destroy order and unity and replace it with disorder, uproar the universal peace. So this is a perfect description of the current state of affairs in Scotland under the rule of Macbeth. A tyrant like Macbeth acts on the spur of the moment, ignoring the principles of reason. And now Macduff is desperate. He shouts out, "Oh, Scotland, Scotland." Right, And then Malcom says, but if such a one be fit to govern, speak. I am as I have spoken. So he says, well, if you want me to govern, to rule the country, here I am, this is who I am, I'm ready to rule the country. And then Macduff answers him, fit to govern? No, not to live. O nation miserable. So Macduff has no objection to Malcolm's private sins. They can be endured. It is only when Malcom states that he does not have any of the necessary kingly qualities and that he would destroy peace in the world, on the previous slide, that Macduff refuses to have anything to do with him. He declares that Malcom is not even worthy to be alive, much less of becoming king. And now at last Malcom trusts him and is now assured of his genuine love for his country. He realizes that Macduff is loyal and honest. But Macduff goes on. He says, with an untitled tyrant bloody sceptred, with a tyrant with no legal claim to the throne, untitled, and a scepter he gained by bloodshed, the bloody sceptred. And then he goes on, when shalt thou see thy wholesome days again? So the wholesome refer to good or prosperous. He wonders if the country will ever experience peace and prosperity again. And then he goes on, he says, the rightful heir condemns himself and curses his family. Now he's talking about Malcom. His father, that was Duncan, was a God-fearing king, leading a holy and completely unselfish life. He says his mother spent more time in prayer than on anything else. So he says, the queen that bore thee oftener upon her knees than on her feet. So she spent more time on prayer than anything else, living each day as if it were her last on earth. So Macduff here is very upset. And then he continues to say that this evil that Malcom says belonged to him is exactly the same evils displayed by Macbeth. This is what drove him from Scotland in the first place. And his heart is filled with despair, and all hopes to save his country have died. So he says, thy hope ends here. Right, but now Malcom immediately confesses that he has been testing him. He is now convinced of Macduff's integrity and loyalty, and all suspicion is removed from his heart. Macbeth has repeatedly, by similar strategies, tried to lure him back to Scotland where he could be caught and killed, so caution prevented him from too easily trusting people. He goes on, he swears an oath before God to put himself at Macduff's disposal. He must now convince Macduff that he was lying. He says he takes back all the evil things he said about himself. They are in fact completely foreign to him. He is still a virgin, has never sworn falsely, has never desired anyone else's property. So it's about him and the problem with lust and the problem with greed. He has never betrayed a trust or broken his word to anybody. He loves the truth as much as he values life itself. And this slandering against himself is the first time he has lied deliberately. Even before Macduff came, their old Seward with an army of 10,000 men was fully prepared to invade Scotland on their behalf. So, and then he says, now will together and the chance of goodness be like our warranted quarrel. So now they will go together. He hopes that their success will be as sure as the justice of their cause. They believe that God approves of their plan to rid Scotland of Macbeth, even though the king is seen as the representative of God, because Macbeth is not the rightful king. He is a usurper. Right, then Macduff obviously was flabbergasted and shocked and confused into silence. He finds it difficult to come to terms with Malcolm's two very different versions of himself. The first one, sinfulness, and the second one, innocence. He says it is hard to reconcile. At that moment, a doctor enters and Malcolm says, well, we will discuss this later. A doctor passes by and Malcolm asks if King Edward would appear before his subjects that day. Right, doctor answers, yes, he will. He says there's a crowd of sick people waiting for him to cure them. Now, it was believed that he was able to cure the sick by laying hands upon them and praying for them, and they recovered instantly. So he had the gift of healing. Right, and he goes on, he says their sickness defeats all efforts of the best doctors, but at his touch, when the king touches them, heaven or God has given his hand such holy power that they immediately get well when he touch them. And then Malcolm just says, I thank you, doctor, and the doctor leaves. And then Macduff is asking, what is this disease he means? And Malcolm answers, it is called the evil. Now, it was a disease called scrofula. It's called the king's evil. It's a disease that causes the glands in the body to swell until they burst through the skin. And then Malcolm describes here what he saw King Edward do. He says he gains his power, that's now Edward gains his power of healing from heaven. And he cured people with strange diseases that was covered with sores, and the doctors had no hope of curing them. He cures them, Edward cures them by hanging a golden coin around their necks while praying for them. Furthermore, Edward will leave the power of healing to his descendants, and he also possesses the heavenly gift of prophecy and other blessings. Right, Macduff, see who comes here, and then Malcolm says, my countryman, but yet I know him not. So when Ross enters, Malcolm recognizes him by his Scottish clothes, my countryman, but he does not know who it is. And then Ross enters, and Macduff just say, my ever gentle cousin, welcome. And then Malcolm says, I know him now. Good God, betimes remove the means that makes us strangers. May God quickly remove the cause that make us strangers. Malcolm has been absent from Scotland for quite some time, and this statement emphasizes the disorder of Macbeth's reign. The true king is a stranger to his own subjects. And then Ross just greeted him, and then Macduff asked a very important question. He wants to know whether the situation in Scotland is the same as when he left the country. Right, Ross comes in to deliver news and to report on the situation in Scotland. Conditions are worse than ever. Scotland has become a country of misery, destruction, and death. So Ross says, he says, Scotland cannot be called a motherland, rather a grave. He says, it cannot be called our mother, but our grave. Only those who are ignorant about their country's position are able to smile. Nobody takes notice of suffering, as it is an everyday occurrence. It happens so often. When a funeral bell rings, people do not even ask who has died, as violent death has become so commonplace. Good men die before they fall ill. So they are murdered before they have a chance to die of natural causes. This is where he says, and good men's lives expire before the flowers in their cups. Right. And then he uses in the middle of what he says here, where sighs and groans and shrieks that rend the air. So it's another description of Macbeth's destructive rule. These sounds convey the painful experiences of people living under Macbeth's tyranny. Sorrow or suffering has become an everyday emotion, something ordinary and rather unimportant, not taken note of anymore. Right, questions from previous paper. Is there scarce ask for who, and good men's lives expire before the flower in their cups. Now the question was, name and explain the figure of speech. It is a metaphor, and good or young people, so good men's, in Scotland are dying or being murdered, expire, before they have grown old, flowers in their caps, before their time, or sooner than a flower worn in their caps. And then another question that was applicable here, the theme of betrayal. How is this theme relevant to the character of Macbeth? Now again, if you look at this, they give you the theme betrayal. They tell you it must be relevant to the character of Macbeth. They do not give you a time frame, in other words, in this scene, in this extract. So you can take it, it is in the play as a whole. And these are just some of the suggested answers. Remember, betrayal relevant to Macbeth. So you can start at the beginning. Macbeth betrays Duncan by killing him. He betrays Banquo's friendship by having him killed. He betrays Macduff by having his wife and children killed. He betrays Scotland, first of all, when he killed the king, the way he is acting like a ruthless, evil tyrant. He betrays himself. In the beginning, he was noble, he was a good man, and this is how he betrayed by what he became. He betrays Lady Macbeth by not confiding in her anymore, by not supporting her, etc., etc. Right. So Macduff goes on and he says, "Oh, relation, too nice and yet too true." Macduff says the story of Ross is very detailed and accurate and true in every aspect. And then Malcom asks, what's the newest grief? And then when Malcom asks what the latest news is, Ross replies that disasters are taking place so quickly that every minute brings fresh news. A sorrowful event that happened an hour ago is already stale or old news, since a new sorrow is born every minute. And then Macduff asks a very important question. How does my wife? And Ross answers, why, well. So notice how reluctant Ross is to break the tragic news of his family's death to Macduff. When asked how they are, he says, why, well. And he adds that they were well at peace when he left them. Because Macduff asked, and all my children? Well, too. And then Macduff says, the tyrant has not battered at their peace. So the tyrant is Macbeth. He did not attack or violated their peace, so he seems worried about them. And then he says, no, they were well at peace when I did leave them. So that's where it is ironic. They were at peace because they were dead and no longer troubled by the daily problems of Scotland or by Macbeth. And then Macduff says, be not niggard of your speech. How goes it? Don't be sparing of what you want to say. Tell me everything. He senses that Ross is holding back information. So a question on this specific part. Know that they were well at peace when I did leave them. Explain the irony. Remember, you have to have yet or but in your answer. So Ross reassures Macduff that his family is safe, yet he knows that they have in fact been killed. Or Ross reassures Macduff that his family is at peace, but they are resting in peace because they are dead. And then the last line that Macduff spoke, be not a niggard of your speech. How goes it? What was the tone? Remember, tone is about what you hear. So his tone was stern or commanding or authoritative or demanding or anxious or impatient or any synonym for those words written there. Right, now Ross started to answer him, but he is so reluctant to tell Macduff the news of his family's death, so he first reports on rumours of open rebellion against Macbeth. He believes these rumours are true because he saw Macbeth's forces gathering in preparation for war. Malcolm's presence in Scotland will encourage men and women to fight in order to free themselves from their dreadful situation. So he says they would create soldiers, make women fight to doff their dire distresses, to get rid of or throw off like clothes, a clothing image, their dreadful hardships and suffering. And then Malcolm answers, he says, take courage from the knowledge that help is on its way. King Edward has given them the most experienced and able soldier in England, Seward, the Earl of Northumberland, and 10,000 soldiers. And then Ross wishes that he had news which was as good as that which Malcolm has just given him. But I have words that would be held out in the desert air, where hearing should not latch them. So he says the news that he has is so painful that it should be cried out in a remote place where what he is saying cannot be heard. So it implies that the news he is about to tell them is so shocking and tragic that it should not be shared. And Macduff wants to know if the news is public or whether it affects only one person. And then Ross answers, there's no one with an honest heart who will share this sorrow, but the main part concerns Macduff alone. It pertains to you alone. Right, and then Macduff begs Ross to tell him the news immediately. If it be mine, keep it not from me quickly. Let me have it. And then Ross says, let not your ears despise my tongue forever. Ross expresses the hope that Macduff will not hate him forever for bringing him such painful news, because he will give him the saddest news he has ever heard. And then he goes on and he says, your castle is surprised, your wife and babe savagely slaughtered. So your castle was attacked by surprise, your wife and children were brutally murdered. And then he goes on to relate the manner were on the quarry of these murdered deer to add the death of you. So he says, if I tell you the details of their deaths, it would result in your own death too. And this will increase the heap of dead bodies. That is the quarry. The quarry is a heap of dead bodies, usually a heap of dead animals, the deer, and now it's Macduff's family and servants. And then Malcolm remarks, merciful heaven, what man, never pull your hat upon your brows. So he says Macduff must not try to hide his sorrow, because never pull your hat. It may be a stage direction. Maybe he covered his face. Maybe he did pull his hat over his face to hide his sorrow. And Malcolm told him, try not to hide his sorrow. Malcolm urges Macduff to speak so that he can share his terrible grief, because it keeps his grief. If he keeps his grief to himself, his heart will break. A silent grief is a killing grief, right? And then Macduff just goes on, my children too. And Ross says his wife, children, everybody that were found at Fife were murdered. And then Macduff is stunned, he's shocked, he's enraged and remorseful. And he feels responsible as he was not there. And I must be from thence. So his absence left them unprotected. It makes him feel guilty. And again he says, my wife killed too? So disbelief makes Macduff repeat everything that Ross has said. And then Malcom tries to comfort Macduff by saying that they should find a cure for his deadly grief by taking revenge. And then Macduff says he has no children. So Malcom, not being a father, does not understand a father's grief. And his advice, even if he means well, was impersonal and insensitive. And then, all my pretty ones, did you say all again? Disbelief makes him repeat everything. And then he goes on, he says, oh, hell-kite, all. Hell-kite is a bird of prey from hell. So Macbeth is seen as a hawk-like bird that murderously swooped down on his wife and children and killed them mercilessly. What? All my pretty chickens and their dam, the children and their mother, at one fell swoop with one violent or destructive attack? And then Malcom again says, dispute it like a man. Fight against sorrow bravely like a man. Don't be overcome by it. So there's a lack of understanding and feeling shown by Malcom here. And then Macduff says, I shall do so, but I must also feel it as a man. So he says he has to deal with the loss like a man, husband and father. The full realization of loss must precede action. It is also not unmanly to feel intense grief and to give vent to it. And he goes on and he says, did heaven look on and would not take their part? So we cannot help remembering the joys of family and home, which used to be part of his life. And he finds it hard to believe that God could allow such a murder to take place without defending his family. And then immediately he says, sinful Macduff. So it's a bitter self-blame. He accepts responsibility for what has happened. And he says, they were all struck for thee, not that I am, not for their own demerits, but for mine. They were murdered because of him. He is the cause of their deaths. Macbeth had them murdered because of what he had done. We know that this is indeed the truth. And then he says, heaven rest them now. He begs God to give them peace. And then Malcom says, be this the whetstone of your sword. Let grief convert to anger, blunt not the heart, enrage it. So a whetstone is a stone used for sharpening instruments. In this metaphor, Malcom says that Macduff's grief and anguish should be converted to anger and used to encourage him to take revenge. His sword should be prepared and sharpened by his deep sorrow so that he can seek out Macbeth and kill him. And then Macduff answers, oh, I could play the woman with mine eyes and braggart with my tongue. So revenge will not come from either weeping like a woman or boasting in false imitation of manhood. He says, but gentle heavens cut short all intermission, front to front, bring thou this fend of Scotland and myself within my sword's length, said him. So he is eager to take revenge on Macbeth, and he begs heaven and God to bring him face to face with the devilish Macbeth as soon as possible. And then he says, if he lets Macbeth escape, then God may forgive him too. If he lets Macbeth escape, he can escape damnation too. He is saying Macbeth will not escape. And then Malcom says, this tune goes manly. It's spoken like a true man. Come, go we to the king. Our power is ready. Our lack is nothing but our leave. Macbeth is ripe for shaking. So let's go to the king. We only need to leave for Scotland. Macbeth is ripe for shaking. So he's ready to be shaken from the tree like an overripe or rotten fruit. So the time is ripe to drive him from the throne. And he says, and the powers above put on their instruments. So the heavenly powers are ready to battle evil. Malcolm and his supporters will be used as instruments to execute vengeance on Macbeth. Receive what cheer you may, the night is long that never finds the day. Day always follows night. They should take comfort from the thought that the longest night and worst suffering will eventually end, and day will break and bringing new light and hope. So Macbeth has plunged Scotland into a period of darkness and suffering, but it will soon be over. So that concludes Act 4 and also our lesson for today. Our next lesson will start with Act 5. I hope you enjoyed today as much as I did. Have a wonderful afternoon further. Stay safe, make wise choices. Goodbye.